that everybody's here because the platform, this is the platform, the redefined News, and it's an honor to present Mark Little. Mark Little, as you know, is the vice president of media for Europe and Asia of Twitter since only November 2015. Before that, he was the founder of Storyful in 2009, which was then sold to News Corp in 2013. But before that, he's been a journalist for 20 years. For the Irish broadcaster RET, he was a Washington correspondent, he was a foreign correspondent and winning awards from Afghanistan. He was a presenter of the current affairs show Prime Time since 2002 until he founded Storyful. Ladies and gentlemen, Mark Little.
Anna, thank you. Thank you. It's an honor to be here today. I was just coming up. Every year I come to Perugia, I get on the bus and I'm driving up the hill and I almost feel like it's going back for Christmas. You know, you're going to meet your friends and your family. And it reminds me every time I come here with those people that I've grown to admire over the past couple of years I've been at this festival, how much of a contribution that I have to say that Chris and Ariana have made to journalism in general. I have to say it's Twitter's 10th birthday. It's also this festival's 10th anniversary. So thank you, and in many ways that you need to understand the way you've influenced what is now like a tribe. I look around the room and I kind of see a movement of people who are shaping new strategies, realities at a time of incredible change. So thank you to Ariana and Chris for what you've given to us. Thank you very much. Actually, let's give them a round of applause. Thank you. It's also kind of the hairs on the back of my neck are standing on end with the privilege of speaking for a platform that has changed my life, and it's not too much to say. I think I fell in love with Twitter long before Twitter actually existed. I've been a journalist for close on 30 years, and I remember back, again, just 10, 12 years ago, that if you wanted to tell a story to a mass audience, you wanted to engage with that audience, you had to have a printing press, or you had to have a satellite dish, or you had to have a radio transmitter. And we as journalists were the gatekeepers. And in what I think will be considered, in history terms, a blink of an eye, everything changed. Because now, you just had to be in the right place, at the right time, with a connection to Twitter and your smartphone, and you could reach a mass audience. And the irony was, it was no longer an audience because the people you were reaching and engaging with had the capacity to continue to shape that story after you published your content. And out of that engagement, we started to see something else. We started to see that every piece of content on Twitter created a conversation on Twitter, which then formed a community on Twitter, which had the power to change reality. And so again, when I say Twitter has redefined news, it sounds like a big claim, but I say that as someone not, and I know I've gone to conferences where you hear representatives of technology companies telling you how their company has changed the world. I come with a different perspective. I think, hopefully, gives a bit more credibility to what I'm talking about today. The most important thing that I've seen is that Twitter now, because of the activity that we've seen through news particularly, has a deep, profound sense of what it is. And I just will sum this up in 3 words. Live public engagement. Live public engagement is what makes Twitter unique. Even at a time when the entire social web is going through revolutionary change, it has given journalists, this is a phrase I like to use, the power to leverage the power of now. And again, I say this as somebody whose life has been changed by Twitter. It's not just an idle boast. Just to go back, and again, I can only speak, to be quite honest, today, not just as the representative of Twitter, but as someone whose life has been shaped by principles of journalism that predate Twitter. So this is a picture of a very youthful me. When I was a TV broadcaster, I was a TV anchor for the Irish national television station, RTE. And I got out to live my childhood dream to be a war correspondent. So I became the foreign affairs correspondent. I got to report and shape the way people saw the world from war zones when elections were going on, from societies that demanded deeper, more sophisticated understandings like Iran. This is where I was about 10 years ago. And then Twitter came along and spoiled it all. In 2009, I joined Twitter. And I shouldn't say this, but I have to say to begin with, I was a skeptic. I was deeply fearful of the fact that this platform was bypassing journalism. Again, no longer a gatekeeper. And yet, when I started to engage, I realized that because of my engagement with Twitter, I was a better journalist. When I got over my fear of Twitter, I realized that every time I tried to tell a story, the story got better and better because of my engagement with people. It was no longer about pressing publish. The story only began after the publication because of engagement. So as well as that opportunity as a journalist, I also saw an opportunity as somebody who cared about the business model that supports news, to start from scratch, to say, okay, like if the AP and Reuters were to start again today, what would that look like? And so the answer that I offered up was Storyful. And we like to think of ourselves as the first social media news agency. The company grew. It gave me the chance to work with the biggest newspaper groups, broadcasters, even the social networks and brands over the following 4 or 5 years to sort the news from this huge cacophony of noise that's out there on Twitter. The company was bought by News Corp just about 2 years ago, and they have gone to build the company into something that is a global force, I hope, with well over 100 people working all over the world, and I'm very proud of that. And I got to a point where I said, okay, the next thing. This is what happens in entrepreneurs. They get kind of very itchy feet very quickly. And I decided, after talking to Twitter, that the logical next step for me as an entrepreneur was to try and help people do what I had done, which was to build businesses on Twitter and build a business model that sustained great journalism. And that was my focus. So when I started to talk to people after joining Twitter, I realized that I was with people who are kindred spirits. And inside Twitter, we have a group who works on publisher strategy, and this is our goal, to help build successful, independent businesses on and off Twitter. The word there, independent, is crucially important. Because there's no point in a platform like Twitter helping business models be created if the publishers themselves, the newsrooms, the journalists don't have control of their own destiny as they move forward. And that, for me, is a critical element of what Twitter does as we go forward. And so I bring to Twitter an understanding, and this is my understanding, of how Twitter plays a role in adding value to every stage of the work of a journalist and the work of a newsroom. And I look at this and I see to myself the discovery of a piece of content. You take a piece of content and you put it together. It is a single piece of content you've got to create. You've got to put together the narrative that makes sense. You then are seeking, when you put that story out there on Twitter, to engage a community and serve them and give them something positive and add value. And finally, you're pushing your content off Twitter. Again, we don't want to keep your story within Twitter. We want to reach the maximum audience because our obligation to the creators of great content on Twitter is to reach a mass audience. Now, talking through this process, I just want to give you a sense of not just what is, but also what's next. Because what we're seeing through discovery of interaction with publishers and journalists is, first of all, a discovery. Close to my heart. This is what I did for a long time, work with people who pioneered verification techniques. And I went into Twitter, and I've never been starstruck, actually, in my years as a journalist, except the day I walked into the London office where our team who developed a platform called the tool TweetDeck. TweetDeck has been the most important journalistic tool I've ever used. And now I get to work with the people there. It's a little bit intimidating. It's like being given the keys to a toy shop. I get to walk in and watch what they're doing. The philosophy behind TweetDeck right now, as it evolves, and what's next is these small, incremental changes, when you take together, make huge differences, not one big bet. So for example, we're adding constantly, shipping every week, new filters that are allowing you not just to use things like location searches or searching for entities, but also searches that allow you to find the multiplicity of content that's out there, increasingly rich visual video content as well. Another key thing is the understanding of this team that what matters to a journalist who's working to a deadline, everything matters. Every single keystroke, every single tab you have to open. And so some of the developments are aimed at that idea. It's a seamless process from discovery to putting your story out there. So things, for example, like a roadblock used to be that you had to sign on to TweetDeck and also sign on to Twitter. No more. Gives you a single sign-on, again, cutting down the number of tabs you have open, the steps you have to take to do some great journalism. If I move on to the concept of curation. So when you're putting that story together, TweetDeck again plays a central role because it's the place that you can take those pieces of atoms of content and put them into a story. So with TweetDeck, we have curation, but we also then have moments. And moments has been one of these sort of innovations in storytelling that is an experiment. It's evolving constantly. I think Jo Geary might be here today, who leads the Moments team in London, so she can talk about all the details there. What's amazed me talking to Jo is in the very few short months that Moments has been a feature of the Twitter experience, it's allowed us to start testing assumptions we have about the way people interact with content and collections of content on Twitter. It's actually taught us something completely new. It's not always what you think, which is one of the great things about innovation on Twitter, is that you're discovering that sometimes your assumptions are wrong and you have to listen to users. A key declaration of intent from the Moments team just recently was the inclusion of publisher links in every moment to allow a user to travel to the site, to the publisher's site, not to keep them within the app. That's a critical statement, as I say, of our determination to support independent businesses. Also, we were lucky enough to be a launch partner for what I think is a truly significant development, that is the AMP project, which is being led by Google to build speed into the process by which you can get people to your site, to the content and the stories that you're publishing. So we're very proud of that idea that within the curation system, again, it's about speed to get to your site and to let you leverage the value of the communities that you have found on Twitter. We also have other elements of the curation process that are less well known, but equally effective. One of the features that we're getting great feedback is Snappy TV. If you have access to a live stream, how do you get that onto Twitter? Well, we've built a system whereby you can edit and come up essentially with the exact kind of display that gets engagement from live television, small clips that drive people back to what you're streaming live. But of course, all this is about one thing. It's about engagement. Like looking back, as I said, Twitter, every news event creates a community on Twitter. And how do you engage with those communities? So for us, as we design tools, the key thing that we're watching is changes in user behavior, particularly around video. So what we're seeing, I think within 3-4 years, about 72% of all Twitter activity, internet activity will be focused on video. We are seeing exponential growth in the creation of video on Twitter. And the engagement rates around video, again, are just multiples of the level of engagement we see around traditional text-based content. But I want to say one thing and stress this. This is not about video replacing what Twitter does well in terms of its textual content. This is the creation of additional layers of engagement for you to leverage as you start thinking about the way you publish your stories. Now, a lot of the stuff that starts as kind of the video tools we have on Twitter starts with kids, 12, 13 years old. I'm going to just let you look at this. Okay, so I could actually watch that all day. So here we have a tool that, for many people, it's a GIF. It's associated with people that are obviously just native to social platforms. It kind of confuses the rest of us sometimes. But here you have an example of a really powerful news publisher, Mashable, taking a piece of video in a few seconds and telling a story that, to be honest, really does tell far more than you can do in a piece of text. And engaging on that basis, again, multiples of engagement on things like GIFs. We also, if I can get back to my slides here, we have other tools as well, like Vine, which again comes out of that kind of playfulness that does drive engagement. In this case, we see a profound message coming out of a Vine, which is back to Ferguson. You remember during the Black Lives Matter protests, where this person on Vine captured what happened before a police assault on protesters to give a very different view of the reality that might be broadcast traditionally. And the point again, the engagement numbers around these kinds of content are truly stunning. But if I had to personify or embody one tool that combines everything I've talked about in live public engagement on Twitter, it would be Periscope. It's a year old. We've had, I think, 200 million broadcasts in 1 year. It has been the pioneer in something that didn't exist a year ago. And when I see the way it's being used by traditional broadcasters, it points to something different, a different way of telling a story. So, for example, after the Paris attacks, a BBC reporter is transporting an audience directly to this scene, and not just in the way you might have a live two-way Q&A with that reporter. They're bringing the audience with them, and they're showing them a reality and then allowing them to interact and having a two-way conversation. So the things that may take a while to develop, these communities of engagement, are happening in this instant. And so for me, again, on a personal note, this reminds me very much of the early days of Twitter, where it gave us, who were in broadcast media, a chance to bypass the rules, break the rules. We didn't have to stick to the traditional rules of broadcasting, and that's why Twitter engaged me to begin with, and that's why Periscope is engaging so many journalists right now. It also, on a personal level, I remember going back in my early days of reporting in war zones. I was in Afghanistan, and I was in the city of Kandahar, which is the birthplace of the Taliban. And I never forget filming things that just changed the way I looked at, I suppose, the reality of war, the reality of life for people who live in the shadow of war. But I had to wait days before I got to a broadcast link. I would dream of something like this, where I could get people who live back in Dublin in my audience, and I would bring them with me. And I would show them what I was seeing right now, but I would also give them the chance to ask me questions, to contextualize it. And again, for me, and I know this may sound to some people like it's just a fact of life, it's not. This is less than a year, this is a year old. So again, this is what it means to me when I see Periscope. Obviously, we are working in a time that there's exponential change in what we do when we have a tool like this. We have to change constantly. I'm seeing what's happening with people like, this is Paul Rostheimer, who's a journalist for Bild, the German newspaper group. And this is exactly what I'm talking about. He took Periscope on a story where he followed refugees across borders from Syria. And at every step of the way, he was able to walk in the shoes of those people and give the power of the audience to walk in those shoes and interact live. Again, things that people like me could only dream of just a few years ago. And again, rapid change means rapid iteration. So I could look at this all day, by the way. This is a Periscope. We had GoPro integration, so you can now put a GoPro camera connected to Periscope, and we've got this guy skiing down a slope, and just the most engaging kind of reality you can have, and also, again, truly stunning. So again, constant innovation in Periscope, just to push forward what is next for Twitter. That is live video, the best form of engagement that we could see on our platform. So publishing, the final part of that circle. And again, I just want to remind you what I'm talking about, is taking content from Twitter to your site so that you get to determine the kind of value you extract, both in financial terms, but also in terms of engaging with your audience. And so when I'm looking at publishing, I think of one statistic that kind of always sort of surprises me, because it doesn't get a lot of discussion, and that is the idea that we know that 320 million people are monthly active users of Twitter. And it's something you already know, it's out there. But when you think about all the people who go to Twitter on its website, through search results, through profile clicks, you add another 500 million people onto Twitter. And the reason why that's significant is, again, it's proof that we're not talking about people who just live in our app. Our obligation is to get creators the biggest possible audience, whether or not they're on Twitter. And so that then informs the next stage in publication and publishing. Working with publishers, we are looking at a value that we're bringing, hopefully, to publishers, which can be summed up in this statistic. There's 1 billion unique visitors who see embedded tweets every month in somebody else's site or app. For example, CNN here. Again, passing over a value that it's up to you, the publisher, to do what you want with that value. And so part of the mission that's being given to us in Twitter, as part of our What's Next, by our founder and CEO, Jack Dorsey, and I can only tell you the impact you have when you've got your founder as the person leading you into the next 10 years, is to develop our relationships with developers, with news developers, the people who are tasked in your newsrooms to build the kind of experience that will engage with the kind of quality journalism that you develop. And we're looking at the challenges that they face, we're listening to those challenges. And we've developed a suite of tools that's become increasingly powerful. I think it's one of the big untold success stories in Twitter, called Fabric. And Fabric is basically all the elements you need to build the kind of rich experience on mobile that could be so difficult. Again, open source, it's free. If you want to know more about it, it's publisher.twitter.com. I just urge you to go, because it's not something that is often talked about in public. And what Fabric allows you to do is build those kind of rich experiences that hopefully are going to drive the kind of value you need to support your business. I'm going to end here because I know that we want to take some questions, and I just want to go right back to the start. And I think when I think about Twitter and I think about publishing and journalism, it cannot be separated from the broader challenges that we face in Twitter in the next 10, 20, 30 years. We're just getting started. And what's next for Twitter is for Twitter to become more Twitter. It's fundamentally what it's all about. There's absolutely nothing wrong with Twitter that will not be solved by what's right with Twitter. Live public engagement. And so whenever we talk about, this year particularly as we set our strategy, we talk about the idea that this year there'll be 5 things we do that will extract increasing value from this. The first, as I say, is a focus on creators, is a focus on live, a focus on relationships with developers who are building incredible experiences, and a focus also on the safety of the platform and the safety of the conversation that happens in this new town hall. So again, within Twitter, this is our mission statement. When it comes to empowering people to protect themselves against hate and abuse on the platform, to giving them the tools on the platform, and you check your Twitter account and you see the tools that you have to mute and block and report. Take that a stage further, to work through the Trust and Safety Council to develop a civic movement that can actually increase the health of our platform and of civic discourse in the digital age. Because remember, the internet is us. This kind of speech predated the digital era. And I think there is an obligation of all of us to work. And for all of us to do something more than simply just protect, it's to promote. Twitter's a place where you spontaneously, collectively, without planning it, gather in solidarity with the people who do face hate in all its realities. Gather in solidarity with the people who suffer persecution for religion, for whatever reasons. Gather in solidarity for the people who are trying to empower people in our society and change the world. And that's Twitter. And that's what we're trying to do in the next 10 and 20 and 30 years. Again, back to a core principle. We're staying with our core principle. Everything we do is about adding layers of value to live public engagement. And so just finishing off, I mean, I've talked a lot about the broader reality. I think I don't have to persuade you of the value of Twitter. I think that's not the point of today. The value of Twitter for journalism, but also for everybody that interacts with a conversation around every form of content, every interest in the world. What I do want to leave you with is that notion of a partnership between journalism and Twitter. It's not that we have all the answers, we certainly don't. And I draw on upon an experience that I had when I was starting Storyful, and I went to this investor and I gave him a business plan, and it had all these like, user numbers in year 3 will be this. The profit and loss will be this. And he stopped and he said, I don't think you should have all the answers. All I need to know is that you have all the questions. And so for Twitter, and for me personally, that's what I come today to ask you to help us with. It's not just about shaping answers. Let's start asking the questions that matter most to you in your daily life, but also engaging with us to see how we can form a partnership that is about you having control of your destiny. That's about us honoring our promises to creators to get a biggest possible audience. And that's what I'm asking you today, is if we can form that partnership on the basis of something that isn't there just yet. So I've been where you sat. Technology companies getting up on the stage and trying to tell you about journalism. And I've been in those panels where journalists talk about technology in Silicon Valley. And always, always, there's this absolute failure to translate realities to each other. It's just this, we just don't talk the same language sometimes. What I really want you to leave you with today is that is changing. That I think you can hear in my voice the passion that I have. I'm with Twitter for a reason, because I believe this company embodies the principles of listening to your users, listening to your partners, and through asking those questions, that's how we shape answers. That's what's next for Twitter. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I have a few questions, and I have to say I crowdsourced my questions also, because there's a lot of Twitterers here. I would like people to raise their hands. Who uses Twitter here? Who's a Twitter user? Okay, great. So
who's not?
Who's not?
Oh,
really?
We're going to have a conversation afterwards.
Who's not? Yeah. So one question, of course, is that there's been a lot of talk for the 10 years of Twitter, and a lot of talk about the fact that it's a medium-sized company in crisis. There's a drop of users and a drop of share price. Why so?
I would predictably take issue with the characterization. I think what we see, for example, in terms of numbers is, I think one of the things I would always advise caution about, two things actually. The first of all is what I pointed to earlier on, is when you hear these monthly user figures, you always miss out something. And I don't hear people, for example, talking about the wider consumption of Twitter. I don't hear them talking about the logged out use, which is absolutely significant, something any company would take into account. And I don't hear about the billion-plus impressions on these embedded tweets. So just a note of caution that, right or wrong, what these figures, wherever they're quoted, are always partial and do not give you the full reality. So that's just why I would sort of question the presumption here. The second note of caution comes back from my experience being an entrepreneur. And I remember an early day thinking, you're obsessed, I don't know if you guys use Chartbeat, where you have that incredibly addictive needle that moves up and down when you see traffic. If that's all you're looking at, it's not going to work. Because what you're really trying to look at is the user behavior that's going on of the people who already use your platform, right? And so what we're seeing within user behavior, and this is what's shaping those 5 priorities I talked about, and one I didn't mention was, a key was refining an iconic brand. This is to use Jack Dorsey's phrase. And what we're looking at is these incremental changes, these kind of broken windows that we can fix that are going to create a simplicity about the platform, which is one of the biggest things we hear from users. They need to find ways to quickly engage in a simple way. And so that's the focus for us. And all of that, we are taking chances. So for example, here in Italy, my colleagues in the media team led by Antonella have been doing things which are testing our assumptions about user behavior that we're seeing. So, give an example of somebody who didn't, let's say someone who's 11 years old. My daughter is 11 years old. And I remember someone saying to me about, it's a difficult time for Twitter. I'm thinking, every 10-year-old has challenges, and I know this as a parent. But she only listens to people who are native to her age. They've never known anything before Twitter. We call them digital creators. You can call them YouTubers. We are seeing signs of incredible engagement on Twitter, whether these people are active on other platforms. So we did an experiment in the Sound Rainbow Festival, where we went up and we engaged a few young musicians who are active in this way. It was quite stunning to see the responses. We got like a 40% increase in the number of tweets, 2.8 million tweets about that event. And again, it's a key about just taking a risk, innovating. Another thing we're doing, and in Italy will be a focal point, will be smart cities. How can we make Twitter a daily utility in the lives of the citizens of the great cities of the world? And it goes back to something we're doing, customer service, where I don't know if you've ever tried to tweet an airline. You're now getting a response. We're thinking public service. How can you get up in the morning, and we work with, let's say, the transport authorities in Milan or Rome. You can now get up and see how the transport system is behaving. Public utility. That's a key to us as well.
Okay. Hossein Darakhshan was just here before you, and he actually said he called against the fact that the internet is turning into a big TV. So the fact that you're showing that Twitter is also really investing a lot in video and turning into a big new TV with Periscope, does that mean he's right? And also, I would like to attach to this question another practical question. I mean, there's already Facebook Live, and Italy works very well. How is Twitter's approach to journals different from Facebook Live?
Yeah, so the first question about the emphasis on live video for Twitter, again, I just come back to the point I made, is it's about extra layers. So the idea that there's and I just ask everybody, it's one of the things that even as a power user before I joined Twitter that I sometimes lapsed into, is a binary choice. It's one or the other. It's one platform or the other. It's one form of content over the other. It's not. These things can coexist. What we're adding and what we're seeing adding is, first of all, led by user behavior, more creation. And secondly, by the knowledge that you can engage in whatever way you want with Twitter. The addition of extra layers is not getting in the way of the live public engagement. So, for example, you make a good point about, are we just another TV? No, the idea about having live video of any form on Twitter is the engagement that's created around it, the conversations and community that develop. That's the power of Twitter, not necessarily owning the content. To the second point, obviously with Periscope, it's no longer the only game in town, but I'll just go back to that idea of the early days of Twitter, that kind of subversion that was in there. I see with Periscope all the time. I'll give you an example. Again, the news leads within my group, we're just saying radio stations love Periscope because it's just like they were in the early days. Like in your face talk radio, you connect directly with your audience and they talk back. And so they're the use cases that speak to the enduring power of Periscope and its uniqueness at the moment, I think, in a rapidly changing environment.
Now, there's a lot of concern about hate speech, and you talked about Twitter's growth also being thanks to the fact that you will be investing on a safe platform, and you underline the word safe. What are you, first of all, do you agree that there's a hate speech problem on Twitter, and what are you going to do about it?
I think, hate speech in many forms, but there's a hate speech problem in society. There's been a hate speech problem since the first time people gathered in a public square. So it's taken a different form. And the thing, and I think, again, I don't mean to go on about the fact that we have our founder leading us, but like I've been in private, and I've been in private with Jack Dorsey and with the leadership team at Twitter, and it is always being discussed. How can we listen to users to give them the power to fight back and protect themselves? So I can say that, working constantly on what the next product feature is. I would advise you all to take a look and go to the to our website. Look at the Trust and Safety website and take a look at what's being done there. The product features are one part of it. We're also launching initiatives in collaboration with other groups. For example, we have a Position of Strength, which is a new initiative we've taken to empower women's voices on Twitter and make sure that their voices can drown out the kind of hate that you do see around misogyny, around sexism. So it's constantly looking out for ways, first of all, to protect and give the power to protect, but not censor. And I have to say again, human rights and human activity in a modern society is about a balance of rights. And for us, we will always be and always have been the platform of freedom of expression. And so therefore, we're not a censor. The emphasis, again, and I put it, is giving people the power to protect themselves against this form of speech, a form of speech that's been around as long as human history.
Can you reassure the many Twitter lovers, the ones that are conservative, that are in love with the old Twitter, the first Twitter, the one that catered to the always-on media, always-on news, and that kind of conversation? Can you assure them that you will listen to them and that your new things going towards video and becoming developing a different kind, more Facebook-like platform will not destroy that old Twitter? I mean, are there going to be parallel Twitters, or do you think that you will lose these followers because there's new ones you're catering to?
One of the lessons we learned was about the multiplicity of experiences and needs and communities on Twitter. I mean, you take linguistic differences, for example, in Japan, you write a tweet, it's an essay. In Germany, you write a tweet, it's a phrase, right? So everybody has a different experience of Twitter. They have different interests, whether it be politics or news or fly fishing, right? So we have built a platform that can cater to multiple needs. It's not new, and it will continue to be what defines Twitter. The key in all of this is choice, right? So we have a lot of fear about the idea that choices are being made for us by social platforms. For us, the key is whatever we develop, we'll always have the choice to opt in or opt out of it. If we choose to develop video content that we know people are creating and consuming, and you don't want to have that content, you can opt out of that experience and just focus on the kind of the TweetDeck kind of flow of information that you have. And I think that's the key to it all. Can we build tools that give you choice? Not make the choice for you. That will always inform what we do.
I have one last question, and I would like you guys to raise your hands if you want to ask something. This is a great opportunity for all the Twitter lovers here. What is your new job teaching you about journalism? And as a journalist, what is your advice to the young aspiring journalists here?
Well, I think it's a great question. I've been there 3 months. The thing about Twitter is it runs on this metabolism that's so fast. I feel like I've been there for 3 years. You get so many experience every day. One of the things I found about journalism is the relationship between journalism and technology. I was born a journalist, not a coder. And so I'm getting a much better understanding of the way that product works. So for example, the idea that we're all tempted in journalism to look for this magic, secret, monumental change that will save our business models. It doesn't exist. The only thing you can do is work on those small incremental changes that up to something big. And what's really for me, I sat listening to the product team on Twitter itemize like the top 10 things they were doing, and each one of them was going to make a small change, but you could see the cumulative total, and that's what it's taught me. For journalists, we have to get used to the idea of small, constant iteration. Advice to any journalist, get on everything, do everything, be constantly sharing your experiences, and exploit the things that have been given to you, particularly, I hope, by Twitter and by Periscope, to bypass rules, to break rules. That would be my advice, because if you watch an old, I hate to use the word old fart, talking about myself, but if you watch a 47-year-old, as I am, and telling you about the great old days, it's not going to be fit for purpose for you. So break rules and just hone your craft every hour of every day and make sure that you understand one thing. In the age of social, your standing is only as good as your standing with the community that you serve, and only as strong as your engagement with that community.
Thank you very much. As far as I'm concerned, I'm satisfied, but I would like to see the questions because we don't have very much time and we wanted to be very punctual also for the next meetings. So please, raise your hands. There's one down there. Is there? Okay.
Thanks.
Please stand up. Stand up.
I'm standing, very short, so it's necessary. Hi, I'm Julie Pizzetti from Australia, from Fairfax Media. I was an early adopter of Twitter in my country for journalistic purposes. I've watched the debates with interest, so I'm glad to hear Mark address some of the critical points. But my question goes to an issue connected to a large, global research study I led for UNESCO about the protection of journalism sources. And one of the issues that emerged is the threat and the risk of journalists seeking to engage with sources who may wish to remain anonymous, who are unaware themselves of the kind of risks of contact being made on social platforms, including Twitter. So Mark, with your kind of journalistic and Twitter hats on, I'd be interested to hear your responses to the sort of concerns that were raised with me and other researchers who worked on the project about the unsuitability of platforms like Twitter, and including other chat apps that are promoted as being more secure. And are there any plans around encryption or to try and address the sort of security issues that we face in an era of mass surveillance and data retention and the sort of threats to traditional source protection laws around the world?
Thank you.
It's a great question. It's something that kind of obsessed me for the last few years. So I look at the work, for example, of an incredible group of First Draft News, who are here, I think a lot of them in the room, who are looking at the concept of the changing role of a source. So it used to be that, obviously journalists were the ones who created content and had a whole bunch of training and ethics and a consequence of the safety that they had responsibility for. But now people, maybe once in their life, will do something of universal value and essentially have no training. They have no preparation for being at the center of a story. And I think there is a need, and I don't think any one platform, excuse me, has a solution to this. I think the only thing we can do is start having a culture change within journalism that says the person who shoots a video from, let's say, the Paris attacks, you should be treating with the same respect and integrity that you treat any source that would give you material in the old days before Twitter. And I don't think that sort of sea change culturally has happened within journalism. As to responsibilities for Twitter, I think there is a responsibility to start looking at this one interesting part of Twitter recently is the toggle between public and private. So again, it comes back to this choice I was talking about. We are a live, public platform, and that's what makes us unique. But giving people the ability to make a choice to go private and to engage in a group discussion, for example, is something I'd love to see journalists use, which is the idea that perhaps in a breaking story, you could use a DM chat to be the kind of forum where you could protect a source while not taking away your ability to engage live and protect the sanctity of that kind of live interaction that we have. So from my point of view, I think it's a combination, just like with safety in general, is the obligation that journalists we have to the source, I hope, will find an open ear in Twitter. I know it will because I'm certainly committed to that. In terms of product changes around that, encryption, security, again, I have to say that I can't talk about individual product changes, not just because I don't want to talk about them. I'd love to talk about some of the stuff we're working on. It's just I would do a terrible disservice to our incredible product teams who are doing things at a rate of knots. So I can't, I'm sorry to say, talk about that directly. Having said that, I would love, Julie, to talk about maybe ways, suggestions you have, because I don't necessarily think I know the questions, even the answers, and I would love if we could have that kind of dialogue, and that's really what I meant when I talked about the of exploring these questions together.
I saw a hand risen here, but are you going to encrypt DMs? You can't say that?
Sorry?
Are you going to encrypt DMs, the direct messages?
Again,
there's
people who are way smarter than me considering those questions, and I don't want to do it a service.
Was there someone there?
This is me.
Stand up. Stand up, please.
Yeah, sorry, I was... I just tweeted my question anyway, but you said that you don't want to keep our stories. I speak as a Twitter user. You don't want to keep our stories within Twitter. Maybe this is the main difference between, except for formal differences, is this the main difference between Twitter and Facebook?
Well, so first of all, we do want to keep your story in Twitter if we can, if that seems appropriate, if you can build the kind of audience you want and need. And you will definitely want to live inside Twitter as you gather that content and the story and the context and the verification. The point, I think, is when you want to leverage the value that gives you as a news organization, we want you to do what you want to it and what you need to do with it. And it tallies absolutely with our core goal, which is to give creators the biggest possible audience. So there's a kind of a happy marriage here that I think is unique to Twitter. I don't like talking about the competitive environment, mainly because it's changing so rapidly. I mean, there's some kid in Manila in a basement inventing the next big blockbuster app, right? And the idea that we plan our future on the basis of what exists today, again, is one of the biggest mistakes I think that innovators make. So, all I can tell you is what's unique to us. It's that commitment to independent business, to you controlling the future of your business model. And I think that's just the critical thing that makes us unique. I can't speak for other platforms or apps.
Any other questions?
I'm at Mark Little News if there's any other questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mark Little. Thanks for being with us.